Time now for the Monday edition of the Discourse. Cybercrime is increasingly being driven by organized networks operating across national borders, with scam centers, online fraud, and other forms of digital crime affecting countries across Africa. Interpol says that recent operations have exposed the scale of these networks and resulted in thousands of arrests. Well, we're joined now by Neal Jetton, who's director of Interpol's Cybercrime Unit, to discuss how these networks operate and the international efforts to disrupt them. Neal, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for having me. Well, hello from Singapore.
So, when you look at cybercrime across Africa today, what concerns you the most about the way that these criminal networks are operating?
Yeah, I think, we've moved away from isolated incidents to more of a very organized criminal element. You are seeing that in the fact that I think 72% of the African countries who were surveyed and responded to our assessment said that they have seen these cyber scam compounds, these cyber scam centers in their own countries. And then you look at just the sheer volume of cases that have some sort of AI component to it. I think it was 55% of cybercrime that are connected to AI in some form or fashion. And I think that number is only going to rise. And then, you look at the large majority of those countries that were surveyed, and they said that at least 30% of the crimes that they are investigating are cyber in nature.
Interpol talks about cybercrime becoming increasingly organized and borderless. What does that actually look like on the ground? What does that mean?
Yeah, so what it means is that you can have criminals who are working in some sort of, compound or, in some sort of residence, and they are targeting victims worldwide. So even if they're in, an African country, they can, obviously impact and affect and target victims outside in other African countries or across the globe. And then it's not just that; the infrastructure that they are using, the servers, they are also located in countries outside of their own, region. So what it really means is that I think Interpol and other, international organizations need to step up and make sure that we are bridging that communication and helping fill those gaps where they are, where they're needed to be filled. You really cannot combat cybercrime alone. Interpol can't do it. We have 196 members, and yet it still requires us to connect with law enforcement, but other organizations outside of law enforcement, private sector partners, academia, other government organizations. It requires a whole of society approach, I think, to effectively combat cybercrime.
Tell me a little bit more about these scam centers that we're hearing across the continent. How do these operations actually work, and how difficult are they to dismantle?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you hear about it, and I think, we live in most of my team is based in Singapore and Southeast Asia, and I think that's where cyber scam centers really became well known. But this typology, this modus operandi of using these scam compounds has spread. It's spread into Africa and Europe and basically across the globe. Yeah, it's a very successful model for criminals. You can recruit, either traffic victims or knowing people who come in and will commit fraud. They'll use scripts to reach out to potential victims, being overseen by the higher level ranking members of this organized crime group. And yeah, a lot of them are using AI to target victims at scale. I mean, it is $1 billion enterprise just in Southeast Asia alone. And to your second question, Peter, about how hard it is, yeah, it's very, very difficult. I mean, a lot of times law enforcement just has a tough time investigating cyber crimes just because it's so complex. As you had mentioned, it is borderless. It requires cooperation with other law enforcement and other regions where even the legislation, cybercrime legislation, differs. So having those impediments, difficulties makes it very, very challenging. So I think that's where Interpol can come in. We come in and we do coordinated operations where we will bring in countries from across the globe. Right now, we were conducting an operation bringing in roughly 20 African countries to look at cybercrime. We will have those law enforcement representatives from each of those countries come together prior to an operation. We will use our private partners to provide intelligence to hopefully go after and be more systematic, strategic in combating cyber crimes and targeting cyber scam centers.
More and more, we're living in a world of Bitcoin, and I guess following the money is also becoming really challenging, especially when with these kinds of scams happening across borders and different parts of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. You see it. I mean, largely when criminals target victims, they'll, especially say ransomware or fraud payments, they expect it in crypto, which is good in one hand because there is an evidence trail, but it's very, very easy for this sort of crypto to become obfuscated, hidden. And so it requires specialized training, specialized tools, which a lot of law enforcement just lack. And so there really needs to be a means to be able to connect law enforcement plus these blockchain analytic companies who provide the tools, as well as the exchanges and other virtual asset service providers to come together and work together to stop these transactions in real time and then allow law enforcement to conduct the investigations.
We've had a case recently here in South Africa where a South African national in Soweto and Johannesburg, um, it was alleged to have been part of an international ring. How do they coordinate? How do they work together to commit some of these crimes? Because we're surprised that someone sitting in Soweto could be part of this global network involved in sextortion.
Yeah, so I mean, we see it in all sorts of crime types, and extortion is just one of them. I mean, we've kind of coined this phrase along with other law enforcement, this industrialization of cybercrime. So what happens is you have these tools and platforms that you can, criminals can go purchase on the dark web that actually enable them to commit these crimes at scale with very little technical capability. So these tools and platforms are there for a subscription, for a fee, and they can go out, yeah, and connect and through these different channels, communication channels, they can connect to other criminals to commit these crimes at scale. Devastating impact.
What are the biggest gaps you're seeing then? Because it sounds like cooperation is something that really is really important between law enforcement agencies. What are the gaps that you're seeing, maybe even between those enforcement agencies, banks, telecommunications companies, perhaps, technology platforms, in trying to fight this?
Yeah, I mean that is a great question. I get asked this, like, how can we combat, how can this our law enforcement combat or our country combat cybercrime more effectively? And there are a few things that I would say, but one of the top priorities I think for any country, any law enforcement is to bring together some sort of anti-cybercrime unit that involves not just law enforcement, but involves private sector partners, cybersecurity companies, intelligent companies, but specifically financial institutions, banks, telecommunications, maybe even judicial authorities, and working together under one roof to have this real-time communication. And now that helps on a national level. But I think then you have to be able to connect and communicate with countries, not just neighboring countries, but across the globe. Again, that's where Interpol comes together. Law enforcement can reach out to us and we will make that connection as fast as we can to facilitate the communication. But it is not easy when you have disparity and gaps in legislation. You have different priorities for countries and what crimes are prioritized and what is not. So there are a lot of challenges. I do see it is not just a glass half empty viewpoint, though. You see 17 countries, according to the threat assessment from that we're discussing, enacted or amended their legislation last year to better combat cybercrime. So there are a lot of steps forward. There's just more work to be done, not just in Africa, but across the globe.
Neal, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so, so much indeed for your insights on this scourge that we're having to deal with across the continent now. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
That was Neal Jetton, director of Interpol's Cybercrime unit, on the growing threat of organised and cross-border cybercrime in Africa and the international efforts to try and disrupt these criminal networks.
The African perspective is stronger because of your point of view. Happy Women's Month. Channel Africa. Channel Africa is evolving, and so are you. Stay connected wherever you are with our brand